So here I am going through this really awkward stage, and it worked. I achieved 90% of my goal, and really sabotaged myself like I typically do, in capriciously sort of putting out the potential that if I did the right thing, things would invariably just come together and seamlessly. So what I'm doing right now is I've walked like well over 1,500 miles just indoors, right? Just like this, where I'm able to drink cold water. It doesn't make sense to people because they're all about feel good, right? They're all about Picatrix wheel, right? They're all about innervating a feeling response. When you get down to brass tacks, when you get down to the base of who we are, what we're made of, and the aphorisms of self, right? Things that were contended and even nurtured, and you didn't have any idea why certain personality traits were expounded upon by your grandmother or your relatives, right? And it could have been so nuanced that you had no idea why your grandma would have some joy that you were smiling in such a way. You had no idea you had those fat little cheeks, that she recognized as a family brand, so to speak, right? Or a certain nuanced way of speaking, where you reflected something in the genetics, and then she would pinch your cheek, right? But there's an energy transfer that occurs there, right? And a lot of times, like I put up, the modern Hermeticist, the Lesser Keys of Solomon. It sounds like a lot of gibberish to most people. They think, oh, who the hell would waste their time listening to, reading, or studying such gibberish? But what you begin to see is that if you take Jesus Christ, for instance, literally, right, and you are a Christian, you understand the esoteric and arcane aspects to certain codified informations that are expressed, namely by way of Jesus Christ, the aphorisms and the sayings that he was said to have conveyed himself. And you understand the multifarious aspects of how they were intended to be or mean, right? And you also understand from a base perspective that this is a pure son of God. And so when you're talking about the gamut of potential, right, this is what is investigated in the Nag Hammadi, the Dead Sea Scrolls, and many other references to Jesus Christ that didn't make it into the 66 main books, of what we consider the Bible, to the Council of Nicaea, right? But when all, this Lesser Key of Solomon and so forth, and the same thing with the Gospel of Mary, or Mary Magdalene, when she talks about the 7 powers, right? These are personalities and personas, because just like Jesus is alluded to, you have this entity, this definite character that matches perfectly up with the application and the use case of a certain way of becoming, right? And so when these behaviors are suggested, associated with a number system, right, it gets into gematria, leads directly into all writings, all characters, and especially when you look at the reoccurring 30 plus depictions of symbols and characters that are found around the world throughout antiquity, you see that there is a base to a language model or a base expression, and that what we consider oral tradition, or things that are discussed in allegory, story, right, reference back to, for instance, we want to believe, it's easier for us to believe that people were so primitive and so stupid that they thought that Zeus, or to more explicitly Prometheus, right, was, for lack of a better way of being able to describe and understand, that they had to create a character. But what we don't see is that these characters that best encapsulate the entirety of the energetics that are performed, right, that are very exclusive to a specific personality or persona, or really zodiacal and calendric through cycles, right, archetype, right, are given a name, and the name it comes from a symbol, and the symbols are best associated by an energy movement or an energy pathway. So when you see, like, one of the most prolific is like this swirl, right? You have this sort of phi or phi swirl, right? This Fibonacci swirl, this golden mean swirl, right? And then you begin to look at how that is a procession. Just as you look at the globe and you learn how to circumnavigate around the globe, and you see the longitudinal and latitudinal lines, right? The equinox, how pivotal, how important that is, right? Where you're getting into torsion field energy, you're getting into this sort of energy flux. And look at the Farmer's Almanac. You have an expected movement cycle through energy systems that are so predictive, right? And that which is not predictive can be marked as an event and seen as an error or a lapse, or just a longer cycle of predictable measure, right? Or an alterable change, right? Something that isn't occurring outside a sort of Mendelbrot set algorithm, if you will, right? Something that could be charted because it can't break free from. So, getting back to this, is that you have all these personalities and these personas, but they're very much based on the news, north, east, west, and south, right? The things that are happening all around us, the transitions that can be looked at as an X, right? As a 6-pointed star, right? As an 8-pointed star, right? You begin to understand the interface and why these symbols are used as energy pathways, and then you begin to also see, and you also notice that there must be energies that work on the back side of the dark side of the moon, right? The side that you cannot readily see, but is evident from all the evidence that you see in front of you of the phenomenon that's occurring cyclically, predictably, right? So it sounds very abstract, and it is. When you talk about these types of things, it's kind of like this reference for this name of God that you don't talk about it outside, right? Like a Yahweh, right? You don't discuss it, because exclusive to you and imprinted in you at the very time of your birth, that you are related. I mean, this is what star charts are about. This is why there's, like, for me, when people have done this on me without really telling me, or I've looked into it, right? There's several different areas of behavior through the planetary bodies that become localized because they affect us through the energetics of the solar system, right? But of course, these are inferences of a larger energetic pathway or pattern that exists outside of that, right? Where you talk about like this galactic cycle or a great galactic cycle, right? So most of the things that we're basing these predictive programming models on really do, whether or not people understand it or they want to hail back to this, right? It really is based on an understanding of a great galactic cycle, and then becomes ever more numerically localized as to identify a specific trait, right? So this is where really bizarre things come into play, where through this refraction, there's a definite disregard, right? And a disruption, an outright disruption that is being done, which you could call chaos magic, right? Where groups of people are allowing this chaotic, disruptive, incendiary behavior, where if they produce an entropy or error type situation, right, they back up and laugh as people with principles have to scramble around and correct everything back into an order. And neither like David Berkowitz, right, the son of Sam, you can't just decide that you're a Christian, right? You can't just be so involved with the process church, right, and deep satanic roots, and having been a henchman for the cause, George Bush Jr. pardoning him from being killed, like many other people, right, that were like foot soldiers for this disruptive, chaotic programming, right, and then just call yourself Christian. Or are they two halves of a coin, right? Is he really doing the magic work of showing margins, right? That he doesn't need to have titleship, but he does, right? He's the son of Sam, right? So it's like this dark energy and these dark entity type. They're already starting to get a little bit. My body, my throat starts to clear out. I had some tea, clear out my throat. In fact, let's add in some. So we're on carnivore. It's definitely not. I poured in a lot of that. It's definitely not my choice, but it's affordable. It's the last thing in the world that I would actually want to do, is to slaughter animals and eat them, right? And yet, with all the principles in the universe, with all the good that we think, that we project, right, out, here we are, making this Faustian deal to eat animal organs, animal parts, raise them, sacrifice them. There is no difference. Like, we try to remove ourselves from that, right? And we have a mass objection on that particular pathway that, oh no, we didn't sacrifice an animal. We didn't raise an animal to be sacrificed. We didn't go through a ritualistic process that leads back to Baal and Moloch and all these other, but actually you did, and I did. And because we didn't commit the sacrifice, but we were a part of it. So you understand what I'm saying is that when you consume the food, you are part of the ritual, right? And when you go into, there's a huge difference. You can get into an abstraction where you say, well, everything's killing something and all diet's killing. It's like, it's not true. Like when you eat the fruit and the nuts that comes off a tree, you're not killing anything. In fact, you are spreading out, almost like a fertilization of life, right? A floral aspect, right? Where it is very pantheism, right? A lot of the studies that Whitehead proclaimed, a Neoplatonism. It's even into animism. It's very much a study of nature in a Luciferian perspective or objective. And I might argue so is Stoicism. If you're dealing with things as they come along, and you are sticking to putting your nose to the grindstone to become whatever has been thrown in front of you, that's your path. So you stick with that and you don't question it. You are following an ideology, right? You're following a moral conclusion, and many would say that the attributes that you're taking on are following a specific god or a specific character or a specific god, source, or energy. So you got these Christians eating turkey sandwiches at their church. You've got these Christians drinking in the blood of Christ and eating the little wafers that personify the body of Christ. You have the worship of, I'd rather have the pure son killed than lose my status or my state in a capitalistic society. That's what's really happening in Christian churches. Okay? That's the true religion that's taking place. But people don't want to break down the fundamental basis. They think that if they look away, they make loud noises, they put their hands over their ears and say, bah, 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 right, like children, and continue on this concrete, ignorant state or status, that I'm going to stick with the persona of what I am, who I am, right? And that this personality is something that I had to earn, but was also given to me, right? So we go back to talking about nuances, right? That these nuances and this behavior align with, in a larger scope, in a more refined scope. So it could be infinitesimally smaller, but more precise, right? In that here you are, this abstract where you are linked up with the zodiacal energies of a specific deity, let's say, but you borrow from other areas, borrow from other parts, right? Where you have influences from other deities. I'm neither justifying the deity or saying that there's an accuracy in this, but these religions are observed, and they can even be observed. The same behavior can be observed going way, way back to, I believe that we have quite a bit of information. When I say we, it's not we, it's them, right? We are the profane. We are the terrorists, right? We are the goy or the goya. We are not the ones on the inside. We are not the intern apprentices, right? We are not the master masons, right? We haven't been initiated into the ninth circle or the Operation Gladio wings and arms of the 1001 Club, right? So we're on the outside. And so when they do these strange child sacrifices, they're relishing in the fact that the mainstream stream, right? The flow, currency, the energy wants to stay ignorant. They want to hide their heads from it. They don't mind casting their vote, right? And being part of the system. They don't mind eating a turkey sandwich or a hamburger and calling it a turkey sandwich. Subway, right? It's McDonald's, right? They don't mind doing those things and packaging it into an aphorism, a product, right? But people don't realize that they are part of the ritualization. They're part of the occult mechanism, right? Of what's going on, the cult mechanism. And it's not that occulted. Like, you pass by the Masonic Hall every single day on your way to work, or or the library. And these are all the Rotary Club, the theater, right? And it works like a motherboard. When you topographically look at it, you see how the road systems and the cars with little people in them are bringing anthropological energies, right? That are bringing the succession of their genetics and their DNA through the process of time, and all of the behaviorism that goes back countless, but it is counted. That's the whole point of generations, right? Hailing back to the Younger Dryas, right? Hailing back to 13,000 years ago. And the things that are found over and over is these mass graves. I just put something up referencing Danny Jones' interview that he had. And then I'm looking at the news, and something that was almost identical happened about 75 years ago. This home that was linked up with the nuns in the Catholic Church, right? They found, and I put that down below as well in the community post, they found over almost 800 babies, right, in a septic tank, that were just flushed out, right? And that or placed them there, and they're all the way up to 3 years old, right? So what the hell's going on there, right? And then referencing back to what Danny Jones just posted up through the snippet of this long interview, was the same thing happened, that these babies were put in with ancient poop and shit, right? Where it was the septic tank, it was the septic area, and they found all sorts of human baby remains there, right? So when we look at the fact that, is it dumb luck that we ended up alive? Is it dumb luck that we do what we do? Is it dumb luck that we discover and we educate and we think about the principles and the processes, right, that really harken back to what we find important, what we see as paramount, what we see as the most important event, that if we could do this one thing or accomplish this one task, it would make our lives worth living? So I'm really out of breath because I'm on my 11th day of carnivore. I'm training, right? So there you go. There's the hypocrisy. But tell me you're not living under the same hypocrisy, right? Does it mean you don't talk about it, right? This is also something that's occurring. This cancel culture is stating that, oh, because you ate a turkey sandwich once in your life, you have no right to talk about the fact that you're aware of what's going on. This is bizarre, right? There's animal sacrifices, unnecessary animal sacrifices occurring. And then you have people who go, well, I like turkey. And then they laugh about it, and everybody else says, I like turkey, right? But then the nuance of it is that years down the road, when scientists make further discovery and find eating dead meat is not good for you, and in fact, we've synthesized these amino acids and this sort of like a matrix type paste that's far better for you, it will actually create an anti-aging effect, right? And then suddenly everybody's doing that, and you're chameleon and you switch face, right? That's really what's occurring, is that you have people that follow along with the status quo. It's a very dangerous thing. Instead of really saying, look, I live in this environment. Like I couldn't eat, I get $290 worth of food stamps every month. I couldn't eat a vegetarian or a vegan. And even when I had the means to do that, where I was taking in more money and I tried it, I went broke in less than a month. I think I ended up spending like $1,700 on vegetables, fruit, just trying to perfect the perfect diet. It became something that I just couldn't sustainably continue to do. And then you become a slave to the system. And these are all sprouted foods. They're all grains. They're all fresh produce that should and could grow practically freely in your backyard if all the shit, right? If all the shit went back into the ground, right? And all those nutrients were creating this nutrient density instead of the strange sanitization issues that we deal with, right? With said septic systems where it's like you're treating it. It's just like the pharmaceutical industry. It's like you're not deficient in any pharmaceutical that they could ever give you. In fact, they stole that phrase, orthomolecular science and nutrition, for some time early on, where I would see doctors. This doctor who prescribed my son the initial assault on his system so many years ago, and everyone in the family is so ignorant, right? Not understanding schizophrenia. I studied into it, right? I realized that the key nutrients weren't there. Not only just taurine, but like niacin and many others. And I bought those supplements. But as soon as you try to stand up for someone else and someone else's ignorance that is taking on someone else's karma, you're attacked. Right? Once your child is in the world, they have to learn themselves. And when you think about, if you knew better, you would never even have had sex in the first place, right? I won't even get into that, but what's considered normal is very much being questioned, right? On a very fundamental scale. Because we get used to things that just don't feel right, that don't feel natural. Yet we live in a society and we're looking around us that supports this, right? It's in every Cosmopolitan magazine, every 17 magazine in the 1980s, right? And even more so, you can choose now which little pocket or window of reality you want to go into through the algorithms on YouTube as it starts to feed into your steady state of reality, right? But you're really grabbing information and pulling it into your paracosm, right? Into your world, or your Weltanschauung, your worldview, right? Your Welt or Welt built, right? Your Weltanschauung Krieg, right? Your Umwelt. The way that you see the world, the picture of the world, the parallax aspects of others that have perspectives of the world, right? And the world in operation, right? When you take all these variables and you put them together. So I'm already very thermic. I did all this work over a year ago. I lost all the body fat. I walked indoors and struggled greatly getting through it. And that's the thing, we forget about the struggle. Even though the struggle is the greatest sacrifice, we forget about it, right? And I was right there, right at my goal. I mean, I could take my waist measurement any time. It was like under 29 inches. If I sucked my waist in, if I could make my waist like 27 and a half, 28 and a half inches last year as a 55-year-old guy, right? And did it, and just needed to really perfect my training, and even got a supplemental boost where I was given not enough money, but I was given a good chunk of money, and I should have just stuck to it. And that's the advice I always give to people. It's like, well, why do you have to move? Why do you have to buy a new car? Why do you have to get a new phone, right? Do you have to do it today? And the answer is no, you don't have to. And the answer is be humble. And if you feel like you're lacking really be honest with yourself of why you think you're lacking and what you think you're lacking, and stop exposing yourself to that person or that group thought, that group thinking mentality, and suddenly it's gone, right? And you know, a lot of younger people could go, well, that would mean me dropping out of this school and starting another school, or maybe, you know, leaving my job. And it's like, yeah, you think everything when you're young, you think everything is so detrimental. There's almost like this entity that is, you know, puppeteering you, right? A straw man of you, or a veneer over you of a certain holographic self, right? That's projecting certain wants, needs, and desires that don't actually even exist. And you'll see that later. And in retrospect, you'll wonder what came across or onto me, like what type of energy was infusing this compulsion or this need to think a certain way or to do certain things, right? To motivate it. And we are being used almost like a muscle movement, or, you know, as a moment, part of a moment arm, right? And that's a really good descriptor, you know, because when you look at these axis of rotation, these vectors, right, these moment or movement arms, right, the required power that's needed, the generation of the lengthening and the shortening, the lever systems, right, we really are a part of a very diabolical machine that if we were to really look at it in its entirety, we wouldn't sign up. We wouldn't eat the sandwich, right? We wouldn't plagiarize or proselytize something that we don't fully understand, i.e. a political party or an affiliation to a political party unbeknownst to yourself that is just simply supporting some fly-by-night moniker that actually doesn't have anything to do with what it proclaims itself to do, just like the bills that are passed, right, every single day, and the agendas that are pushed in Congress, that none of them are good. They're getting used to them. And so it's all about public image, right? All anyone cares about these days, and I'll end it with that so I can get back and start breathing because I'm getting kind of lightheaded. All anybody is concerned with is money. And I know that seems like an oversimplification, but that is the primary cause. It's always been the primary aim. It is the profane terrorist plebeian that is their God, right? It's all of our God. Even if we act like we don't do it ourselves, at the end of the day, you got to pay your phone bill, right? You might have to pay your car payment. You might have to pay for your rent or your house, right? So we really don't know where we're going to be at the end of the day, right? So that's why, and you know, I haven't even gotten into the deep, intricate layers of how I know this. On, you know, it's like I'm taking a very surface and a very superficial view of this, and when I'm not talking and when I go back to my walking, I'll be left with the impression of a very bizarre lifetime, of very bizarre experiences, that everything connects and correlates back into an astounding, awe-inspiring, jaw-dropping reality, right, of phases and a phasic return that we are a part of, right? And, you know, these artists that depict a certain agrarian, you know, farmer type of a struggle, you know, with more primitive peoples. And then you see a lot of these murals and a lot of this artistic rendering that show these peoples, you know, struggling and going through all this strife and then finally coming out of it. And what we know now is this is all part of a predictive programming, a bioengineering, right, of technology. And while we're faced with this internet of bodies that has already been partially implanted within us, the IOB, right, typically has a lowercase o, right, the internet of bodies. It's a real thing. If you want to look up Catherine Austin Fitz, I'm not saying she knows everything. I'm saying this is where you go, right? Or if you want to look up Joseph Farrell, I'm not saying he knows everything or that he's an innocent person or that I'm endorsing him as a human being. I'm saying look at his studies into the Nazi bell, look at his studies into very deep esoteric sciences, real energy, and you'll see that this is what turns the seasons, right? That the seasons are under control. Weather manipulation isn't just manipulation. It's a very precise methodology, right? Where someone doesn't even have to push a button, right? If you're getting into the aspects of this internet of bodies, that somebody could actually, IBM came up with this many years ago, right? IBM, and then you have, what is it, Judith Stern? 210, 220 IQ, has been working for IBM for years, right? So you have these people who receive these massive downloads and they go through these processionary ritualistic processes. There's absolutely nothing unique about them, right? But what's made unique is that they're fashioned and created and put into a certain family situation. It's not some haphazard random thing, right? It goes back to a genetic line. So for you to argue that somebody's gifted and you're just jealous, not the way anything works. Nikolai Tesla was receiving downloads. What do you think's happening with Elon Musk? Like literally today, one of his SpaceX rockets just blew up, right? You're going to see a lot more of that because what happened is that now he needs to be just like Nikolai Tesla, right? And he's trying to sort of martyr himself as if he's one of these men, but he really isn't. He didn't invent anything, right? Everything from Neuralink to Twitter X, right, to SpaceX, to Tesla, he stole ideas that have been around forever, right? And just he's a capitalist, and he admits as much. That's why he says he aligns himself more with Edison than with Tesla, right? He's a capitalist that just comes along and capitalizes. That's how you get all that money, right? He started some things that are very nefarious, right? Don't forget about the fact that he started PayPal, right? And I use PayPal. In fact, I use it because of what's going on around the world, like with Charles Hoskinson and ADA Cardano. I've had a shit ton of cryptocurrency. I have none. I'm kept in this place, right? Where you're always having to challenge yourself and go, do I sacrifice my money, my future? Like I've had a lot of cryptocurrency, all of the top crypto. I knew before it even happened. I did my research, right? I had quite a bit. I would be very wealthy right now. I would have been wealthy years ago if I hadn't have sold cryptocurrency to do things for people that in the end were just whimsical, unnecessary movements that were being challenged. The tides were being shifted so that I would stay in a certain minority status state, right? And so ideas become dangerous when you're able to think outside the box, when you're able to see the patterns, when you're able to not only see the patterns, but to create a combative situation, right? When I say situation, I'm saying that when people begin to discover that there is a process and that the world works according to this process. And so I identified this with esoteric principles of light many years ago. I know the movement pattern. I know the process. I have some inclination to the esoteric mathematics that I've laid out, right? Epimath. I've seen the general design of the system. I've had the most bizarre experiences that you can imagine, from being initiated into occult ceremonies without even knowing what I was doing out in public, right? For me to look around, realize in a non-paranoid way, through validations, as everyone's validating me and looking at me, right? I've been handed strange books when I've traveled hundreds of miles and set up roots somewhere else, right? Or going back to roots, right? I've walked the same processionary pathways that Jack Parsons probably walked, right past Pasadena City College, and walking down Orange Grove or Orange Avenue, wherever he lived there in Pasadena, right? Being handed the master key system by somebody who was like, their hands were shaking and their eyeballs were coming out of their, this Rastafarian, this guy who ran this Rastafarian, he was a DJ for a Rastafarian radio station, right? Or at least he played Rastafarian music and was a DJ when I was at the Magic Johnson's 24-hour fitness working there, and hands me the master key system with these big eyes saying, you need to have this. Right around the time, in fact, it could have been the day that Michael Jackson's funeral took place. While one of the Jackson family, I don't remember who it was working out at the gym, right? So there's all these cross-sectional parallels with an ignorance of not really knowing how the whole thing works, but knowing that it is your job, you're the only one that sees it, to carry on this informational energy, and to be, I'm not going to say a connector because that's a bunch of bullshit, right? It's carrying a burden. And then oddly enough, when I was down there, such a bizarre situation where my uncle, who just recently passed away, who I have this TRX from, right? I'll be going in there if I'm not too sore to train, right? That's all it takes. And you got the water, right? You have to live this way. And I can't tell you how many times. And you think, right? Like when people are pumping out this persona, Arnold Schwarzenegger, all these people, they still do steroids. They're on huge stacks of steroids. And everybody thinks, oh, they're older now, they don't do that. It's keeping them going now, right? And the people who, well, anyway, I'm going to end it right here because I do need to breathe and I need to get back to this, but everything comes down to principles, and you're either on one side or the other. You're either on the anti-principle side or you're on the principle side. You either have reverence for it and you will die for purity and purity's cause, right? And this is kind of the way, like King Arthur, who was that? Glenn, what was it, Kilman? Yeah, he passed away and then didn't have anybody that would keep on his legacy, right? And I could have his name wrong, but there's so many people, William Cooper, right? Jordan Maxwell, like people who really rallied and stood up for this and saw the adamant need to learn these principles for themselves and to express these principles to other people. And it seemed like they were talking about such a cryptic message, but in fact, it was something that should have been taken quite seriously.